there is a journey not meant for the faint of heart. A journey that begins not with a choice, but with a calling, a light you're born with. And that light becomes your greatest burden. From the moment you entered this world, you carried something different. Not a talent, not a skill, something deeper, a way of feeling into others, a sensitivity so acute it could read pain behind a smile, sense abandonment in a perfectly curated life, or hear a silent scream through someone's calm tone. You didn't ask for this. You just were this. And yet, that gift, your empathy, has cost you more than anyone knows. Because light, as Carl Jung understood, doesn't just illuminate, it reveals. And what it reveals, to those who cannot bear to see themselves, becomes unbearable. The narcissist sees your light not as warmth, but as a threat. You don't just empathize, you see through. And to someone who builds their world on illusion, that is their worst nightmare. Jung called it the collision with the shadow. A confrontation not only with your own darkness, but with the repressed, denied, and disowned parts of those who seek to exploit your light. And if you've ever loved someone who chipped away at your soul piece by piece, only to discard you once they had hollowed you out, then you already know this journey has stages, and survival is not guaranteed. But if you make it through, you become something that terrifies the narcissist more than anything else. Someone who sees the game and no longer plays it. Someone who loves with discernment, who can no longer be manipulated. Someone unbreakable. Today, we'll walk through the 4 psychological stages every empath endures when abused by a narcissist, through the lens of Carl Jung's exact teachings on shadow, projection, individuation, and the deep alchemy of suffering. Because your pain is not just trauma, it's initiation. And what lies on the other side is not just healing, it's transformation. So if you've ever asked yourself, how did this happen to me again? Or whispered in the dark, why do I keep attracting those who hurt me? This isn't just another relationship video. This is the map out of hell. And the final stage? It doesn't just liberate you. It breaks the entire narcissistic supply chain. Stay with me until the end, because what you'll discover isn't just how to survive. It's how to become what you were always meant to be. Carl Jung was not just a psychiatrist. He was a pioneer of the inner world, a cartographer of the unconscious. Where others saw symptoms, Jung saw symbols. Where others diagnosed disorders, Jung decoded meaning. And at the heart of his life's work was one idea. The human journey is a process of becoming whole, not perfect, not polished, but integrated. He called it individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are. Not the self you perform for love or adapt to survive, but the authentic self beneath all masks. But individuation doesn't happen in peace. It happens through pain. And nothing reveals this more starkly than the relationship between the empath and the narcissist. Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." For the empath, the narcissist becomes a mirror, a brutal, often traumatic one. Not to show them who they are, but to show them the parts they've abandoned, their power, their anger, their right to say no. And for the narcissist, the empath is an even more dangerous mirror, one that reflects back everything they've denied, their shame, emptiness, and need for control. Jung described this dynamic in terms of projection, the act of casting disowned parts of ourselves onto others. The narcissist projects their unworthiness onto the empath, labeling them as needy, dramatic, or too sensitive. And the empath, in turn, absorbs this projection as truth, believing that if they could just love harder, be quieter, shrink more, the pain would stop. But it never does, because what's really happening is a shadow dance, an unconscious exchange of pain, shame, and unmet needs. Jung warned that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And that's why this journey matters, because you weren't fated to suffer. You were called to awaken. As we move through each of the 4 stages, we'll explore not just the tactics of narcissistic abuse, but the deep psychological mechanisms behind them. We'll unpack why you stayed, why it hurt so much, and most importantly, how to reclaim the parts of yourself that were never broken, only buried. This is not about blaming. It's about understanding. And from understanding comes power. So now, let's begin the descent into stage 1, where the light you were born with first becomes the target you never saw coming. Stage 1, the light trap. Stage 1 is the trap most empaths never see coming, because it's set with their greatest gift, their light. Carl Jung wrote extensively about libido, not merely as sexual energy, but as life energy, a creative force that animates our consciousness and drives us toward meaning. Empaths, he observed, often carry what could be described as an overflow of libido. It's what makes you radiant. It's what makes people feel safe, seen, and deeply understood in your presence, before you've even spoken a word. You're the one people cry to without knowing why, the one who notices what others miss, the one who always feels just a little too much. But Jung also warned that where this kind of light exists, the shadow will inevitably follow. And in your case, that shadow comes wearing a smile. In this first stage, your empathy becomes magnetism. You draw people in like moths to a flame, not just those who seek healing, but those who seek to feed. Jung would describe this as the unconscious attraction of opposites. Your warmth activates their coldness. Your presence magnifies their absence. Your light unsettles their darkness. And yet, you don't see this as danger. You see it as connection. This is what makes it a trap. In the beginning, the narcissist doesn't come as a destroyer. They come as a soulmate. They mirror your depth. They reflect your values. They love bomb with the exact words your inner child has longed to hear for years. You think, finally, someone who understands me. Someone who sees me. But what they're really seeing is your potential as supply. This is what I call the reconnaissance phase, a term that mirrors Jung's insights into psychological projection and manipulation. The narcissist is studying you, cataloging your reactions. They notice how you respond to vulnerability. They test your boundaries subtly. They reveal a wound, then watch to see how quickly you rush to patch it. They're not falling in love. They're gathering data. Because this isn't intimacy, it's intel. And you mistake being needed for being valued. That's the lie of stage 1. The empath often comes from a childhood where they played the role of the family healer, the one who soothed tension, absorbed pain, and translated the emotions no one else would name. You were taught, implicitly or explicitly, that your worth was tied to how much you could carry for others. So when the narcissist presents themselves as broken, you feel purpose. This is where I belong. But what feels like purpose is actually exploitation. You're not being loved. You're being leveraged. Jung once said, "Where love rules, there is no will to power. And where power predominates, love is lacking." What you're experiencing in stage 1 isn't love. It's power in disguise. The narcissist's entire dynamic is built on domination through admiration. They don't want a partner. They want a mirror that reflects back the illusion they've constructed for themselves. And the brighter your light, the more threatening it becomes. Because the closer they are to you, the more they begin to see what they lack. Your sincerity exposes their deception. Your groundedness highlights their instability. Your empathy threatens to reveal their emptiness. That's why, without warning, everything begins to shift. The praise becomes critique. The vulnerability turns into manipulation. The openness becomes control. But that's stage 2. Right now, you're still in the glow, still convincing yourself that the inconsistencies are just growing pains, that the pain is just passion, that if you love a little harder, everything will go back to the way it was in the beginning. You don't yet realize you're in a trap, because the trap isn't built with chains, it's built with validation. And the most painful part? You walked into it because of your goodness, because of your willingness to love the parts of others they cannot even look at themselves. But remember this: your light isn't the problem. Your light is the evidence that you were born to see deeply, to heal, to feel. The tragedy of stage 1 is not that you loved too much. It's that you didn't yet know how to protect the love you give. And until you do, that light will always attract not only the wounded, but the predators who feed on them. But don't lose hope, because awareness is the first step out of the trap. And in stage 2, the real war begins. Not on the surface, but in the soul. Stage 2, the soul extraction. If stage 1 was the seduction of light, stage 2 is the theft of your soul. Jung described the collision with the shadow as a necessary but devastating step in the individuation process. It is not a metaphorical darkness. It is a psychological death. And in the hands of a narcissist, this darkness doesn't arrive gently. It arrives masked as love, then weaponized as control. Welcome to the Great Devouring. This is the phase where the narcissist, having secured your devotion, drops the mask. Not all at once. No, that would be too obvious. Instead, their warmth is rationed. Their admiration turns conditional. Their silence becomes punishment. The person who once made you feel like the center of their universe now treats you like a burden they regret. But it's not random. It's designed. Jung called this dynamic psychological parasitism. The narcissist isn't interested in love. They're interested in fuel. And in stage 2, you become their power source. This isn't about emotions anymore. It's about energy. And the extraction begins. First comes the projection bombardment. Jung defined projection as the unconscious act of attributing one's unacceptable qualities onto another. But here, it's relentless. They project their shame onto you and call you needy. They offload their guilt and accuse you of being untrustworthy. They mask their insecurity and label you as too much. And the empath, ever tuned into others, doesn't reject these accusations. You absorb them. This is what I call empathic inversion. When your gift for feeling into others is turned against you, you begin to feel responsible for their moods. When they rage, you soothe. When they withdraw, you chase. When they cheat, you wonder what you did wrong. You don't realize it, but you're being slowly programmed to mistrust your own perception. This is no longer a relationship. It's a psychological operation. And the cost? The crucifixion of the authentic self. Jung spoke of ego dissolution under intense psychological pressure. And in stage 2, you begin to lose yourself entirely. You walk on eggshells. You filter your every word. You become a shapeshifter, contorting into whatever version of you they'll least resent that day. Your nervous system is stuck in overdrive. You live in a state of hypervigilant empathy, constantly scanning for threats, trying to prevent the next explosion you didn't cause. But you can't stop it. Because they don't want peace. They want power. And the more you try to appease them, the more you disappear. You begin to experience what Jung would recognize as dissociation, a detachment from your own essence. I call it soul fragmentation. The parts of you that once felt vibrant, your creativity, your laughter, your truth, go underground. You lose touch with your needs, your desires, even your memories. You become a ghost in your own life. And perhaps the most cruel part? You're punished for the very traits that once made you lovable. Your kindness is labeled weakness. Your honesty becomes ammunition. Your loyalty is mocked as foolishness. Jung wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." But in a narcissistic dynamic, only one person transforms, and not in a healthy way. You shrink while they inflate. You wither while they feed. And yet, somehow, you stay. Because beneath all the gaslighting, beneath all the cruelty, there's still that flicker of the person they were in the beginning, the one who mirrored your soul so perfectly, and you ache to bring them back. This is where the narcissist launches what I call the emotional starvation cycle. They give you just enough affection, just enough warmth to keep you craving more. It's not love. It's a drip feed of validation designed to keep you hooked. And like a starving person, you accept crumbs and call it a feast. But in the dead of night, when you're alone, something whispers. Don't let them steal your essence. That whisper may come from your faith, your intuition, or some buried spark of your former self. But it is real. And if you hear it, if you follow it, you begin the slow, agonizing journey back. Jung wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And this is what stage 2 demands. Because survival here isn't about fighting them. It's about refusing to abandon yourself. You don't get out of stage 2 by becoming harder, colder, or crueler. You get out by holding on to your core qualities, empathy, love, honesty, but pairing them with boundaries. This is the paradox of stage 2. The pain is so great, you think the only way to survive is to stop feeling. But numbness is not safety. Numbness is surrender. And you weren't born to go numb. You were born to discern. This stage is the furnace, and like metal forged in flame, you either shatter or you emerge with a strength that cannot be faked. So if you're still here, still feeling, still hoping, then you're already halfway out. Because you've remembered something they tried to erase. Your essence is not for sale, and your light, even dimmed, has never stopped shining. Stage 3. Dark night of the soul. Carl Jung once said, "No tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell." Stage 3 is where you find yourself face down in that hell. Not the external kind. The chaos is no longer loud. The abuse may have stopped. The narcissist may have left. Or perhaps you finally found the strength to walk away. But the silence that follows is not peace. It's devastation. Because now, without the manipulative distractions, without the constant performance of pleasing, you're left with one thing, yourself. And you don't recognize who you've become. This is the empathic breakdown. It's not just exhaustion, it's an existential unraveling. You don't trust your intuition anymore. You question your memories, your decisions, your worth. The voice that used to whisper truth has gone quiet, and in its place is a deafening question. How did I let this happen to me? Jung described this as the dark night of the soul, a period of profound psychological and spiritual crisis that precedes transformation. But in the moment, it doesn't feel like transformation. It feels like failure. You're not just grieving the relationship, you're grieving the parts of yourself that died to sustain it. Your joy? Gone. Your trust? Shattered. Your identity? In pieces. This is where many people give up. They crawl back to the narcissist. They numb out. They convince themselves that maybe the abuse wasn't that bad. Maybe they were too sensitive. Maybe they imagined it all. And this is exactly what the narcissist wants. Because they often sense when you've reached this breaking point. And they return with what I call the final harvesting campaign. A sudden wave of affection. A desperate apology. A breadcrumb trail of affection just convincing enough to make you doubt your awakening. But it's not love. It's extraction. One last attempt to drain whatever remains. Don't fall for it. Because here, in this wreckage, is your turning point. This breakdown is not pathology. It's psychology. As Jung explained, under extreme psychological pressure, the psyche will force a collapse to make space for truth. The mask has shattered. The illusion has died. And for the first time, you begin to see clearly. You are not too emotional. You are not too dramatic. You are not broken. You were exploited. And now you have a choice. To either retreat back into the role you were trained to play or step into the fire and face the parts of yourself that allowed it. Jung called this the confrontation with the shadow. But here's what's critical. The shadow isn't just about what was done to you. It's about what you allowed, what you denied, what you sacrificed in order to be loved. You begin asking what Jung called the questions of individuation. Why did I abandon myself to keep someone else comfortable? Why was I so afraid to say no? Why did I think I had to earn love by bleeding? These are not easy questions, but they are sacred. Because for the first time, you stop looking outward for the answers. You stop trying to fix others, and you start holding yourself. Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." The narcissist irritated you because they mirrored a disowned part of you. The version of yourself you exiled to keep the peace. The version who had needs, who had boundaries, who had a voice. Healing isn't about blaming yourself. It's about owning your part without owning their behavior. That's the line. That's the alchemy. You reclaim what's yours and return what never was. This is where the empath begins to awaken, not by hardening, but by softening toward themselves. You realize empathy wasn't the problem. The lack of boundaries around your empathy was. Your giving nature was never wrong. But giving without discernment is not love. It's sacrifice. And you were never meant to die for someone else's survival. This stage isn't the end. It's the midpoint. The ashes before the rebirth. The moment you stop asking how to be loved and start asking how to love yourself. So sit in the ashes, yes. Mourn what was lost. Grieve who you had to become. But listen closely. Because beneath the rubble, something ancient and sacred is stirring. And in stage 4, it rises. Stage 4. Phoenix rebirth. By the time you reach stage 4, you are no longer who you were. The illusion has collapsed. The mask has been incinerated. And in its place emerges something the narcissist never expected and cannot control. This is Phoenix rebirth. Not the glossy version found in the self-help slogans, but the real, lived transformation that only comes after annihilation. You've walked through fire. You've questioned your sanity. You've touched the edges of despair. And you survived, not by becoming bitter, but by becoming clear. Carl Jung believed the process of healing was not about becoming someone new. It was about integrating the self you had disowned. He called this individuation, the alignment of your inner parts into a conscious, sovereign whole. In stage 4, that process is no longer theory, it's reality. You are no longer confused by charm, no longer lured by pity. You still feel others, but you no longer absorb them. Jung called this differentiated consciousness, the ability to remain deeply attuned to others without losing your boundaries. You no longer merge, you discern. This is the stage of shadow-integrated empathy, a mature, fortified version of your gift. You still care, but your care now has limits. You no longer offer unconditional compassion to people who show conditional cruelty. You no longer open the door to those who stomp through your soul. You become what I call empathically sovereign. You give by choice, not compulsion. You love from fullness, not from emptiness. You help when it honors you, not when it erases you. This is what narcissists fear the most. Not revenge, not rage, distance. Your presence no longer responds to their tactics. The guilt trips fall flat. The silence games backfire. The bait and switch doesn't trigger a chase. You see the patterns now, and with quiet certainty you say, I see the game, but I don't play anymore. Jung wrote, I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. In stage 4, you live that truth. You choose. Not reactively, not desperately, consciously, deliberately. You reclaim the power you gave away, not with force, but with clarity. You develop what I call boundaried compassion, the rare capacity to hold love and limits at once. You don't harden your heart, you guard it. You don't isolate, you filter. And the relationships that begin to enter your life now are unlike anything from before. These are not people who need your energy to survive. These are people who respect it. People who have done their own work. People who understand that empathy is not a weakness, but a sacred responsibility. You begin to live not from wounding, but from wisdom. And something even more powerful happens. You stop needing to be understood by the narcissist. You stop hoping for closure or apology or recognition. You see them for what they are, a mirror that shattered, but revealed something you needed to see. Jung believed that when one person heals, they don't just change their own life. They shift the collective. You are no longer part of the narcissistic supply chain, and that alone alters the system. Every empath who crosses this threshold breaks a generational pattern. Every boundary you hold makes it harder for predators to feed. Every no you speak teaches others how to protect themselves. You become what Jung called the wounded healer, someone who has transmuted their pain into wisdom and now carries light that can no longer be stolen. Not because you shine brighter, but because you shine smarter. And this light, finally, is yours. Not the kind that burns you out, not the kind that gets siphoned, but the kind that illuminates yourself first, and then the world. You no longer perform, you embody. You no longer chase love. You are love, with boundaries. You no longer fear being alone, because solitude now feels like sovereignty. And what once felt like your breaking point has become the blueprint for your wholeness. This is the truth. You were never too much. You were never the problem. You were never broken. You were becoming. You've now seen the journey. The 4 psychological stages every empath endures in the wake of narcissistic abuse. Stage 1, where your light drew in the predator. Stage 2, where your soul was siphoned and your selfhood dismantled. Stage 3, where the illusion collapsed and you stood in the ashes of everything you thought was love. And Stage 4, where, against all odds, you rose, not hardened, but transformed. Carl Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And that is exactly what this path demands of you. Not to become someone new, but to remember who you were before the world told you that love meant losing yourself. Because now, you no longer confuse empathy with self-abandonment. You no longer call exhaustion intimacy. And you no longer need to prove your worth by bleeding for those who cannot feel. You've learned to love with limits, to feel without absorbing, to walk away without guilt. This is not the end. It's the beginning of a new chapter, one written not in pain, but in power. Because the light of the empath can never be extinguished. It only grows brighter, stronger, and truly unbreakable. If this journey resonates with you, if you saw yourself in these words, consider subscribing. This space is for those walking the path of transformation, of individuation, of reclaiming their deepest truth. You are not alone, and you are not done. The next chapter begins now.